So it wouldn't have like looked as cool to your friends or sounded as cool in a story. You're not like,
hey, yeah, look at all this slutty things this girl's texting me, and then, oh, she invited me right back to her place. I'm the man.
So yeah, that sounds cool, and it makes, you know, it makes for a good story. It makes for fun, salacious internet entertainment, but it's not the most high percentage way to go. How do I convey sexuality over text without coming off as horny or creepy? Common issue a lot of guys have. The second question, which you'll see the relationship between the two of these pretty quickly, I think, is I want to start sexting a girl, but she refused. How do I recover from this and eventually get her sexting me? And this one comes from Fabio. All right, so both of these have to do with getting sexual in text, right? And a lot of guys I get these questions: how do you sext a girl the right way? What's the right way to, like, you know, start doing XYZ thing? What's the right way to start talking dirty over text, etc., etc.? And again, I get this question a lot, and I'm not gonna say that it's an across-the-board terrible idea in all cases to sext a girl. However, I am going to say that most men massively overuse the idea and are way too focused on it. Maybe this is because of the natural inclination of men when you just get sexual and to just want to, you know, communicate sexually with a girl and just get to the point as quickly as possible. Possibly that's it. Possibly it has to do with a lot of people, when they are teaching online dating, they will put out content of girls sexting with them because it is salacious and it is a little bit like shocking and it is a little bit like, oh, I want that kind of thing. And so it's kind of good advertising for someone to put it out and for someone to highlight it. It's also fun to like brag to your friends in real life. Hey, look, this girl sexting me, etc. So it looks very macho. It looks very masculine. It feels really cool to sext a girl. But I still think it's largely generally not the best idea. And here's why. So in order to sext with a girl, you need some level of attraction and some level of comfort and trust. Now, what else requires a certain level of attraction but also a level of comfort and trust? Well, how about getting a girl on a date? That requires the same things, right? And if you followed my work for some time, you might know that I have this idea called social capital. And social capital means basically a girl at any given point is bought in enough or not bought in enough in order to agree to something with you, in order to say yes to something. And that if she says yes, it tends to increase social capital. If she says no, it tends to decrease social capital. Now, if your end goal for messaging a girl is to sext her, then when you have the social capital to sext her, you should go ahead and do so. But if your end goal is to actually have sex with the girl in person or develop a relationship with the girl in person, well, then sexting is tangential to that. It's not necessary in that. And the very same social capital and very similar levels of social capital even that you could use in order to be sexting with a girl, you could probably use to get the girl out on a date. And I don't know about you, but I think my odds of sleeping with a girl that I have in person are a lot better than my odds of sleeping with a girl where I have to send my penis in ones and zeros over the phone. I don't find that works as well or feels as good. So in general, I think that your social capital is better used for getting the girl out with you in real life than it is for sexting. And if you try to sext a girl and you get a rejection, a la what Fabio is talking about in his question here, well, then that does set you back, and it's going to make it harder to then close for what you actually want, which is meeting the girl, going on a date with a girl, developing a relationship with a girl, etc. So it's kind of a tangential goal that is not very much helpful towards the real goal. Now, if you do sex with a girl and it works, in theory, wouldn't you say, okay, well, you're sexting, it's working, can't that just increase your social capital? Shouldn't that just make it easier to get the girl on a date? And the answer there is maybe. Now, on one hand, if you're sexting and it's really good and really fun for her, that can increase her arousal in terms of wanting to meet you for a date. It can increase the upside, so to speak, right? Because a girl decided to come on a date with you, there's two things. There's having enough upside to make it motivating for her, and there's having a minimal enough amount of downside to make it not scary, not terrifying for her, so it's worth the risk. So when you start sexting with a girl, what does that do to this dynamic? Well, on the one hand, sexting, well, first of all, if you sext badly, it just hurts the dynamic, period, right? You just show incompetence at sexting, you make the girl feel uncomfortable. That's just flat out across the board going to hurt you. So that in and of itself is a risk, and maybe not even worth pursuing if you're not entirely confident in your sexting, which again, a lot of guys actually mess up the sexting too. So that's a whole other factor. I'm even assuming in this answer that you're good at sexting. Let's leave out the idea that maybe you're bad at sexting and you just make more mistakes. But even assuming you're good at sexting, and you get the girl more aroused and all those kind of things, well, that's going to increase the upside for her. It's going to increase her motivation to come out on a date with you, perhaps, but it's going to make her less comfortable with it. It's going to make her think, oh, wow, if I meet up with this guy, it's just for sex. Oh, wow, maybe this guy's not like a relationship material, et cetera, et cetera. Oh, wow, if I meet up with this guy too easily, maybe he'll think I'm slutty. Maybe because we've been sexting, I need to make him work for it a little longer. I need to make it, go farther. Or maybe it's like, I would have met up with this guy just at my house because I feel comfortable. But now since we sexted, I'm too worried that he's going to think of me just for sex. So I'll meet up with him, but I'm going to meet up with him in a nice, well-lit public place, and I'm going to take it slow on the date just to prove something, et cetera, et cetera. So there's all these different things that can happen. Now, is it possible that you sext a girl, it goes well, she's really aroused, and then because of that, she invites you straight back to her place? Absolutely, it's possible. Absolutely, it can happen, and it does happen. But in those cases where it did happen, that same girl quite likely could have been gotten onto a date through other means, and that date would have had a very high likelihood of closing as well. So it wouldn't have looked as cool to your friends or sounded as cool in a story. Not like,
hey, yeah, look at all this slutty things this girl's texting me, and then she invited me right back to her place. I'm the man.
So yeah, that sounds cool, and it makes for a good story. It makes for fun, salacious internet entertainment, but it's not the most high percentage way to go. A much more high percentage way to go would be, oh, this girl's messaging me, she seems to like me, let me get her on a date. We went on a date, it went well, we went back to my place or her place, and good things happened. And that's a way less interesting story. It's way more boring, but it is way more effective in terms of getting to sex, in terms of getting to a relationship in a positive way, and in terms of even framing that relationship in a way where she's going to feel good and normal about it and be able to ground it onto reality and that sort of thing. So I'm not as big a fan of sexting as many guys are in general, and as many people even who are teaching game seem to be. I think a lot of times in that case, again, for promotional purposes, it is useful for them to put out some sexting type stuff. Do I believe in sexting ever? Sure. But generally it would be a case where you have a very obvious and very strong green light. So if the girl starts moving in that direction first, then by all means, I think that it's okay to follow her lead. And the good thing about that is it then is framed not as though you are this horny, creepy guy that's trying to escalate sexting. You are this person who is responding to her flirtation. And in that case, you can flirt back and still maintain the sort of more aloof than her position. Now, I'm not going to say aloof. It's hard to be super aloof and super, unavailable and cold while sexting, potentially. But you can at least be the person who got chased into the sexting still. You can still be the person who is considered the higher value person in the relationship. And this is an interesting distinction in game in general, right? It's not that you don't need to be into the girl at all, because the more you get to know the girl, you are going to show that you're into the girl. So, people are like, oh, I can't ever show interest or I'll lose all my value. No, it's fine. You can show interest. You just want to show a little less interest than she is. You just want to be the less bought in party, but that doesn't mean you can't be bought in. If she's very bought in, you can be a little bought in. Okay. So I do want to point that out. And it is totally fine to follow the lead in sexting. A couple of things with sexting. One, be smart. Don't put stuff in writing or on a phone or on the internet that can come back to bite you in the ass. Don't put out stuff that if you do eventually break up with this girl, you're going to be, you're going to be kicking yourself for sending it, because it could ruin your career or make you look like an idiot and stuff like that. So one, be careful and be cautious for that reason. Number two, understand when you're sexting or putting this stuff out, you're putting out something that's very controversial potentially, or, it can be polarizing or offensive to some people in some cases, and it is in writing. There is a literal written record of it. So, be careful in that regard as well. And then the other thing, just in terms of doing it effectively, and this is my own personal style, certainly you can do sexting or talking dirty or any of those kind of things in a way that is very direct and references body parts and uses, what would you say, foul language, or uses inappropriate language inappropriate on television, on network television, different stuff like that. I'm not a fan of that. I'm actually more of a fan of encapsulating the feeling, encapsulating the idea without mentioning the body part. So instead of saying I want to do XYZ with your pussy or something like that, I might be like, as I caress your most intimate place and you feel the passion rising to the point that you can barely control yourself. Right. So you see how I'm talking about the experience of it, and I'm sort of using euphemisms. I'm hinting at the thing or hinting at the body part without saying the body part. And in general, I find that to be safer and more palatable and acceptable in many cases. Now, again, follow the girl's lead. If she starts talking about your cock, you can start, responding about your cock, for example, right? That's totally fine. But she led you there. Final kind of answer to this question goes to, I think it was Fabio's question, where he said, I tried to sext, it didn't work. How do I get her to sext again now? Which is all the same things I said before, all the same things I said about sexting not being the best outcome and that going on a date being better, and that it's, risk to reward. It's not exactly the most, high probability event, all that kind of stuff. But there's a second error here, which is a very important, very common error that I do want to address, which is going for the exact same thing that you got rejected on before. Put that aside, get past it, get the girl on a date, and forget that aspect of things. Why are you so caught up in this one step happening? There is basically no one event or one step or one line or one physical escalation short of sex that is necessary in a relationship in order for it to be a relationship. So if something doesn't work, skip it, leave it out. Even something as like fundamental and central as kissing. Potentially, if you're talking to a girl and you've tried to kiss her and it didn't work, instead of being like, well, I failed at the kiss, how do I kiss her now? Sometimes just skip it. Just do other physical escalation moves. Just pull her hair, kiss her neck, that kind of stuff. Now, in the case of kissing, because it is very central, you might still try kissing again. But in the case of something else, like say, for example, hand holding, right? Not at all essential to having sex, not at all essential to having a relationship, and not anything you need to do until, the relationship has been established necessarily. So if you tried to take a girl's hand and she rejected it, don't try and take her hand again. It's not that important, right? Or if you tried to talk about a particular subject because you thought it would, make things better or move things in the right direction, and the girl seems resistant to that subject, stop trying to crowbar that subject into the conversation. Just let the conversation flow and realize there are, thousands, if not millions, if not an infinite number of paths towards sex, relationship, whatever. So don't get so attached to one thing happening, especially if that one thing is something that it's debatable whether you should have even done in the first place. Okay, so that's my take on sexting. There are times when it's good, and when the girl does lead you there and is clearly indicating that's what she wants you to do, by all means take that lead. But you initiating it usually tends to be, in my experience, very low percentage and very easily messed up. It's one of those situations where you can go very, very right, very, very right, very, very right, and you go just a little bit wrong and you just ruin everything. So for that reason, I really do suggest that as a strategy, you tend to avoid it, or you tend to learn a style of game that is not dependent on sexting. Again, it's a nice little thing you can have for added flavor when the situation is clearly, obviously right, but don't be trying to force it into situations where it's not. Two quick final points, which I will throw in very briefly because I've covered them extensively throughout my body of work. So if you want more on this, check out my other podcasts, my YouTube channels, etc. I've covered this extensively. Check out the program, The System, for example. It's in there in depth. But in terms of how to escalate and make it man to woman, not make it super sexual or super erotica novel-y or anything like that, but just how to make it man to woman. The concept that I like to refer you to is a concept called premise, which is basically that you are in subtle little ways throwing in things that are a little more intimate, right? So this can be just vaguely mentioning, not in a direct sense, maybe not even mentioning having sex with her, but just being willing to talk about a topic that's related to it, or to mention the fact that mention the fact about how some people are good kissers and other people are not good kissers. This is very different than saying I want to kiss you here and do this to you physically here and that kind of stuff. Just saying oh yeah, have you ever had that situation where someone just they kiss you and it feels like XYZ? So you mentioned sex in some kind of oblique way and you brought it into the conversation as a topic, but you're not specifically hey, let's have sex, and not specifically talking about what you will do during sex. The other form of adding premise is to increase the intimacy, and oftentimes this is even better. For example, if you're talking about the world in this context of just talking about the world, and then you start talking about the world in this context where there's this idea of us or we or you and her together, taking that frame of an existing relationship, taking that frame of a question of whether you and she will get along, or an idea that you and she might get along, all those kind of things do tend to build the intimacy and that kind of stuff. So there are a lot of things you can do that are man to woman rather than sexual, and that's where I would put your focus in terms of the escalation. Second question, or second thing to just throw in as a final note is, so I talked about Fabio's question where he tried to sext and then it didn't work and they tried to sext again and why that's a problem. But let's go a little more general with it, and we say that he tried to sext and it didn't work and now he just wants to salvage the interaction. Well, in this case, again, this is something that I've talked about extensively in my body of work, so go check my YouTube channel, my other podcasts, etc. for it. But the idea here, the general concept, is the idea of backing off, backing away from the precipice, going a little less escalated than you have before. And then we call it change her mood, not her mind. Get the mood, get the vibe of the conversation good, and do not try and escalate during that time. Just be chill, be fun, be relaxed, even be overly friendly or overly nice, just a little bit. And then once the vibe's okay and relaxed again, then you can start gradually moving things forward. And again, this would be done in what I just said, which is by gradually injecting a little premise, and if that's received well, a little more and a little more and a little more, and gradually building up. Okay, so those are two kind of general strategies. I'm not going to go into them in a lot of depth because, again, I've talked about them a ton elsewhere. But yeah, that is my take on sexting, escalation, being man to woman, all kinds of things like that. And both of those, like sexting is a problem, and then obviously being man to woman and how to do it correctly is an issue for a lot of guys. So hopefully that helps you and gives you a lot of information you can use there. Hey guys, thanks for watching. If you're into online dating, I want to let you know I've just released my brand new messaging guide. This is basically everything you need to know how to message a girl from online dating or frankly anywhere. What to send in the first message, how to go from message to phone number, how to go from phone number to date, every step along the way. Check it out at the link below. I think you're going to love it.